There's a spectrum of Aboriginal people here. By that I mean there are status Indians, First Nations as they're also called. There are also Métis people who have a different legal status. I mean, in a country and a place like this where people have mixed parentage, it's a true melting pot. So there's different perspectives to things. But one thing I encountered everywhere I went, no matter who I spoke to, whether they were white, black, brown, Aboriginal, Métis, First Nation, whatever, everyone hated those white liberal jet setters like Leo DiCaprio or Jane Fonda or Neil Young jetting in from Hollywood, spewing venom at the town and jetting out. I think it bugged Aboriginal people the most because it was obvious that these white liberals were just using Aboriginal issues as a club to hit the town, a town that happens to employ an enormous number of Aboriginal people. Here's one discussion I had with a Métis leader in town. It's great to see you. Thank you for your hospitality and by that I mean welcoming me to Fort McMurray. I don't come here that often, but I feel like I'm sort of an honorary Fort McMurray because I'm always talking about Fort McMurray. What's your view of Fort McMurray?
Well, I think it's a great place. I've been here about 18 and a half years. My kids have been here, when they were young. One was 2, one was like 4.5, and they call this place home. I lived in Edmonton, lived in Calgary, and this place turned out to be a great place to raise kids. You had to put in certain control sets, but if you did that, you had a great chance, and your kids had a great chance, much better than they could get anywhere else.
Now, tell me what you do in town. You're involved in some politics and some community stuff, but for a living, what do you do in the city?
Well, right now I'm doing some consulting, but my main thing, what I'm doing right now is I'm working with a company called Campbell's Music, and I'm working in the repair shop. I used to do this a long time ago, and so I've come back and helped them with the reorganization. They got bumped into a new location, and it's had a major impact on them.
Now, one of the things that I always say, and people doubt me on, is I say that, look, Aboriginal people are not adverse to the resource sector. In fact, if you look back historically, whether it's the fur trade, whether it's trapping, whether it's forestry, Aboriginal people do exploit the resources, and the oil sands are just a new form of that. And all these white liberals say, no, Aboriginal people hate the oil sands, and the oil sands hate Aboriginal people. And I'm out in Toronto, and I say, well, no, that's not true. Now, what would you say? You're a Métis man.
I'm Métis, and one of the things about the Métis people is we've always been resourceful, and exactly what you said. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of asking the white person to go back and wear skins and stuff that were sold back from the Hudson's Bay as well. So those resources come from people taking it and moving forward with it. The biggest thing that the Aboriginals want, or speaking from my experience, is that they want to be involved in the communications, the consultations. They want to know what's going on, and they want to be part of it. Where they get upset is if they're walked on and they're thought of as if they're not even there. Now you take a look at some of the legal issues that have been going on in Canada, and they're starting to recognize that Aboriginals meant all Aboriginals, not just First Nations. And, they also recognize that they've never been given the rights that were issued in those treaties. And so there are issues that at some point in time Canada has to resolve.
Now, you're talking about legal statements and treaties and even a philosophical question. Let's get very practical. On a practical day-to-day basis, as a Métis man, do you believe that companies like Suncor and Syncrude and MEG and CNRL in real life, so I'm not talking about legal this or treaty that, just day-to-day dealings, how would you say the oil sands companies treat Métis people, First Nations, and other Aboriginals?
Well, they're all a little bit different, but on the majority side, they treat them fairly well. First Nations get better treatment because some of the languages that are taught in our legal system speak directly to the First Nations. The Métis are caught in that gap. And it's unfortunate because they're actually the largest growing population of Aboriginals is the Métis, because face it, if you're only First Nations, that means both sides have to be. Yeah. So as we amalgamate into society, we have to have those changes. It's just a fact.
It seems to me, I'm in Toronto these days, even though I'm from Alberta originally. Seems to me Fort McMurray and the oil sands companies really are trying to have a cultural aspect to what they do. whether it's naming facilities or trying to support some Aboriginal culture or language or arts, some people might say, oh, that's just for show, that's just PR. It seems more legit to me, but I'm out in Toronto, you're out here. Do you think the companies are trying to be culturally sensitive?
That's a difficult question to ask me. From my perspective and some of the things I've witnessed and come through, I would have to say no. I think to some extent they're exploiting that. I mean, right now Aboriginal music is basically the drum beatings, and you've got the people in traditional dress. Well, we don't dress like that anymore.
So
we
you're
dress
saying
like
it's
you and I.
so it's saying it's almost like a caricature?
Yes, that'd be a good representation.
So what's the right way then? Because I think there's a lot of PR pressure to have a smudge ceremony or to have these very old school ceremonial things. What's the right way then? If you're saying the symbols are hollow, what's the right way?
Well, I mean, you've been in this city several times. You've probably seen the cultural diversity that we have here.
Oh, it's huge.
And the right way is to acknowledge all these people. All these people play into developing this city. One person to say it's this or it's that truly doesn't understand what Fort McMurray stands for, because we are the community that are open to the world. We take people from almost every nationality and every country in the world, and they're here, and they're trying to make a better life for themselves. Are we on a touchy subject as far as oil and the natural resources? Yes. But for all those bandwagon people who want to get on there and talk about, oh, that's the worst thing and that's dirty oil. Like, have you seen coal? Have you seen some of the other items that are out there? And you're picking us simply because there is a carrot called the media that is paying attention to us, and they're jumping on that bandwagon.
Well, you're a fella who's moved to here. Obviously you were attracted here more than other places were holding you there. And whatever challenges, it seems to me that Fort McMurrayites can solve them together. At least that's the hope. The reason I say that is a lot of the critics of Fort McMurray and the oil patch aren't even Canadian. They jet in on their private jets. I'm talking about Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm talking about Neil Young. Folks who fly in from LA for one day, pronounce the whole place evil, immoral, claim that they care about the environment and Aboriginal people, and then fly out the next day. What do you make about that?
Well, I believe those people aren't in search of the truth. They get a snippet and they get to see one thing, and they believe that to be the greatest truth. It's like us standing here. We look around, we got a Walmart, we're in an older mall. This is typical of almost every small town in every city. Yeah, we got some trees in the background. Other than that, you can't tell what city we're in. So somebody to get that snippet without seeing the whole thing and understand the whole process isn't about the truth. They are about showboating, and they are about a message that they want to send that has nothing to do with the truth, in my opinion.
Well, both Leonardo DiCaprio and Neil Young and Jane Fonda, who is in Canada about a month ago, rich white liberals from LA, fly up here and say, we speak on behalf of Aboriginal people. You're a Métis man. What would you say to some white millionaire saying, I speak for Aboriginal people?
Wait, let's get this straight. We'll look in the camera. Don't speak for us. We can speak. Yeah. We're intelligent people. We're modern. We're human. Stop it.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate your thoughtful view, and I think it's an interesting one, because you're right, Métis are sort of in that gap between the First Nations, who may have treaties or have certain rights, and it'll be interesting to see how that figures it out. I think that there's enough prosperity and enough jobs and enough democracy here that we can figure these things out. I'm not saying Fort McMurray's perfect, but no place is. I'm optimistic. I think what can kill it, though, is not low oil prices, but anti-oil sands politics. I'm a little worried about that. Are you worried about this new government, this provincial NDP, and their anti-oil sands views that they've expressed in the past?
I'm very worried. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head in one of your latest rants, where you talked about the new chief of staff showing poor judgment, or what appears to be poor judgment. We won't know until these people get in their jobs and start making policy. But looking at historically, and I'm old enough to look at that, at some of the other areas where they've been, and it is very scary. the vast majority of probably the youth, if you were able to get the demographics of who voted, see this as a change. And it is a change, but they don't understand what that change means.
Listen, it's good to catch up with you. Thanks for giving us your time. I hope Fort McMurray stays strong, and I hope that the Métis people and people of every background fuse together to build this great city. I tell you, I love it here. Now, it's easy to say that when it's 30 degrees. When it's minus 30, it's tougher to love, but the people keep it warm.
Well, I tell you what, we invite you back on when it's a minus 40 day in January for you to be a true Fort McMurray or what.
Well, listen, I lived in Edmonton for 4 years. That's a baby step. That's not quite as cold as Fort McMurray, but it's
My
getting
hometown.
Yeah, right on. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Ezra.
Cheers.